Good time. Good timing, because we have just gone live on Facebook.
We'll threaten you with it. Right.
Thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're now live in Click Meeting here in the room and on Facebook as well. Professor David Jones is with us today. Thank you so much for joining us again. It feels like ages since we've done one of these together. Absolutely ages.
It is. I've known for ages.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a while, isn't it?
Certainly before Christmas, but it's nice to be back.
Yeah, no, it is, and we've got lots of questions in, which is lovely. Just a wee disclaimer before we start, just for people to remember that these Q&As don't take place of a consultation with your own clinician. We're aiming to provide general medical information in these sessions and not medical advice. Also, please be mindful that the Facebook is a public forum as well. You can join us in the room here for a bit more privacy.
Just before we start, can I just a couple of bits of news that I think will be interesting and relevant for people?
You can.
In case people haven't picked up. So the first thing to say is in the UK, here, seladelpar has now been approved by the MHRA, which is very good. We want more treatment options. It isn't NICE approved. That will happen in a couple of months' time. I don't think any of us anticipate any problems with that, but it's just a process that we have to go through. And I think then we will have that available to go alongside elafibranor, which is now pretty. There were some issues around the logistics of getting it, so we've been sort of gearing up to use that as one of the second-line therapy options. So that's good news. And just about the update around obeticholic acid and the issues around it. The update is that there is no update, really. So in the UK, obeticholic acid remains entirely freely available, no change to previously. In Europe, the EMA, and that's not a Europe versus the UK, it's where the regulator comes, so the European Medicines Agency, so the EU countries, they are developing, so the EMA is withdrawing it as a blanket thing, but there will be ongoing access being organised on a country-by-country basis. Now, not all countries are embarking on that, but Spain, for example, have gone straight in there, and there's continued availability of the drug. So that's all a little bit more piecemeal. And for America, the FDA, OCA remains available, and there is talk about what further studies are needed to confirm its benefit. And I think, just so everyone's aware, one of the things that we're really looking at is, let's ask ourselves, the problem has been how to do trials. So you've heard that talked about many times. So let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we do in practice? In 2025, when you only have a single therapy, you use that therapy, and if it doesn't work, you don't really have a plan B. But the moment you've got more than one therapy, you're in a position where you can do something different. So now, if people don't respond enough to urso, which is our model for treatment, we have bezafibrate and fenofibrate and obeticholic acid and elafibranor and shortly seladelpar, right? So we've got choices. Choices are good because if people can't tolerate one of them, we can use one of the others. But what if people aren't responding enough? Well, when you've got other options, you would look to change. So where I think we're heading towards is a trial that does what we do in practice, which will increasingly happen. And the two things that I think are going to be really important, so this is kind of hot off the press of people's thinking, is that there are two things going to be really important for, do we need to change your treatment? Okay, so whether you need a second line treatment is usually on the basis of the alkaline phosphatase, but do you need to change will be based on two things. One is the bilirubin value that you have, the sort of jaundice chemical, and then the other is FibroScan. So FibroScan is going really prime time in terms of monitoring. So the magic number is one I've talked about in these sessions before, which is 10. So where people's FibroScan is below 10 and their bilirubin is normal, then there's no reason to change. But if either of those isn't the case, then we change. And of course, that would make the basis, because if you would in real life change to another therapy, then the first therapy has kind of failed, hasn't it? And so that's what we're looking at for trials. So we go on, we are gaining treatments there. We are not losing, certainly in the UK, any treatments, and we will find a way through it. But I know it confuses people. I have to say, I'm very pleased about this. I don't think it's particularly worrying people. In the clinic, availability of the drugs and some of these concerns about what's available, I've been asked about it by precisely no patients, okay? And I don't know that. I suspect it will be the foundation, it will be us at these sessions, it will be some of the things we write and say. But I do think people are remarkably level-headed about it, as you should be, and people, literally, people are not worrying about it, and you shouldn't. So I just thought that was useful, a bit of a catch-up.
No, it's absolutely great. You've actually hit the nail right on the head for our first couple of questions, actually. So
yeah, we're ahead of it already. Was there anything other than that, do you think?
Well, I'll just run over them, actually. I was going to ask you just a general question about the new treatments today. So we've obviously posted updates about the new treatments that have been available, and there has been some questions that have come along. So, and with regards to elafibranor and seladelpar joining the treatment, we've got some questions along. Should they be used alongside urso? Are they a replacement for OCA and fibrates? And how should our patients speak to their healthcare providers about trying these new treatments? But I think that's really just what you've covered there. It's just if there's anything else you want to add.
Just one thing to add about that is that, they think of them as mainly as direct replacements or alternatives to bezafibrate and OCA. Okay, so they are alternatives for people who have failed to get the right response on urso, but it is conventional for us to continue urso, and we could argue what's the logic of that, and people have done, but that's what we tend to do, and there's a kind of argument for that. So you've not seen enough of a response to urso, you add in a second treatment, a bit like blood pressure treatment. Nowadays they don't swap you from treatment 1 to treatment 2. They would add in a lower dose of a second treatment. For all of these treatments, OCA, less so bezafibrate, but certainly elafibranor and seladelpar, they are licensed for use in people who can't tolerate urso. Now, urso is not, there are people who struggle with it more so than sometimes some doctors acknowledge. And actually in 2025, you don't need to do that. So if you're struggling with it, sickliness or other side effects, which we do see, then absolutely. In 2025, I would go for, if you just can't take urso, I would go for elafibranor or seladelpar is actually what I would do. OCA, because of the potential for itch, is a little bit more complex. So that's the other situation. So they are, I suspect, very straightforward to use. So the conversation with your clinician is, do I need another therapy? And what are the numbers? Alk-Phos of 200, bilirubin normal, FibroScan 10 are the magic numbers. 200, 20, 10. Okay. Actually, there's a rhythm to it. Actually, I've just thought of that. 10 times 20 equals 200.
It does.
I've never thought of that. Okay, so there you go. That's the way to remember it, isn't it? 10 times 20 is 200. So 10 for your FibroScan, 20 for your bilirubin, 200 for Alk-Phos. You want to be below all of those. Okay? That's quite...
You're quite pleased
with yourself. Jeremy Clarkson would say, sometimes I'm astonished by my own genius.
You're pleased with yourself.
Honestly, not a serious point, everybody. Getting people how to remember these things is really important, because... And this is why I hate the 1.67 times the upper limit of normal for alkaline phosphatase. I mean, who's going to remember that?
Yeah.
So simple ways to remember it. 10 times 20 is 200. You heard it here first, folks.
It's actually really good. It's good to remember.
It is, isn't it?
We've had a comment.
That's it. You want all those numbers below that nicely, and I do think for people, FibroScan, we know we talk about it a lot. I think we're really now understanding its use. So I think it is partly about whether you've got cirrhosis or not, but only partly, because most people don't. But I think this intermediate value of 10, I think below that you're comfortable. Above that, I'm going to want to do something different or better. And I think it would really sharpen it up. And I think if you are in a hospital that doesn't have access to it, I think this is not just a PBC thing, this is a liver thing. I think it's increasingly difficult to justify that. it's like not having access to blood tests in 2025. So I don't know if have you encountered that, Mo, with people not having access to FibroScan?
No, not
Yeah.
specifically, but we did have FibroScans on offer at our patient conference last year, and hoping to do it again this year. And lots of patients took us up on that, which was brilliant.
Okay.
So often we see the care sort of stall a bit, don't we, if they're waiting for the FibroScan results? So, it's good we can get it.
So I think for everybody, I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think it's a very good thing for the foundation to pick up. Everywhere that manages a PBC patient should have a FibroScan physically. Of course, the point about it is once you've bought it, it doesn't cost anything to run it. So then it's easy to use it all the time. Then the other thing is just to make sure it's not being used in a way that makes it difficult. So when we first got FibroScan Newcastle, you'd have to book an appointment to have it done, and it would be a 6-week wait. Now you pop to the room next door and our nurse does it. Takes 2 minutes. Okay. And that's how it should be. Not every time. The other thing, just to everybody, please, FibroScan will occasionally generate rogue results. Okay. And everybody who does lots of FibroScan or does it in lots of patients knows this. Whereas a bilirubin value of 20 is going to be the same tomorrow and the day after because of the way in which the assay does, there is some human variation in it. So if you do get a FibroScan value that is very different to what you've had before, or is at a worrying level, then don't panic. The clinicians will repeat it. So if you had one done last year and it was 5 and now it's 20, no, it isn't. That's not physically possible. And so it will be a rogue result. So it is not an absolute arbiter of truth. It's part of the picture. So just be aware of that. It's absolutely better than not having it, but it is not infallible, just to say that.
Yeah. We've actually moving on to our next question, which is a question about OCA. There's something similar in the chat here in the room as well. So we've got a patient who's originally from the UK, is now living in Australia. She's been on Urso for the past 3 years since her son was born, but since her son was born, she's become a non-responder. She started obeticholic acid, 5 milligrams, a couple of years ago. Didn't see much change after that, but then 8 months ago was put up to 10 milligrams, and her numbers are starting to improve. She's been concerned by the information she's seen about OCA, and that's similar to the question we've got in here. And her healthcare professional is allowing her to make the decision as to whether to stay on OCA or come off it, but she doesn't feel she's got all the information she needs, and she's a bit concerned about the safety information. And I know we've covered it on here before, but I think it would be useful just talking about the second lines to cover that.
I agree completely. And the comment in the chat about the recent FDA safety communication. So I can explain all about that. Okay. Let's take a big step back. All drugs that work have some potential side effects. There isn't a drug invented that doesn't do that. And so everything we use is the balance of risk and benefit in general. And then in an individual, you reevaluate that regarding to the individual's benefit. So the fact that a drug benefits other people in the population but hasn't benefited you, that's, it isn't beneficial. You know what I mean? It's a starter as it's beneficial or it's not, and then you adjust it according to the individual. And obviously side effects are personal, right? We talked about Urso. Some people have no problem. Some people get very sick with it. Risk benefit is different in those people for that reason. So you have to individualize it. Now, we laugh a little bit because this is what we do literally day in, day out. And sometimes august bodies can come along and tell us, you need to think about this. And we go, yes, thank you very much. In the 35 years I've been practicing medicine, I've never worked that out. So we do that all the time. Now, what does OCA do that is good, right? Let's make this about OCA. What does OCA do that is good? It significantly improves the liver blood tests. We know that. And those are the liver blood tests that we know are associated with the disease. So they are the things that we measure. So every time you go to the clinic, the progression of disease is measured by these tests because they accurately measure what's going on. And what OCA does is improve those. Now, absolutely, you can't guarantee that connection between what's really happening in the blood test remains with the treatment, but it's worked for every other treatment. That's the basis we use Urso. So that's the first thing to say. the second thing to say is that there is long-term data, so very large studies, which many people on this call will have taken part in through the research consortia, have looked at over a long period of time what happens to people with different sorts of blood tests, on treatments, not on treatments, and what actually happens to them in terms of complications and transplant and stuff like that. When you do that, there is no doubt that people who benefit, who are on these therapies, and I would apply this to all of the second line therapies, do better than people who aren't. Now, that's not infallible, because there might be a reason why people weren't taking them, which themselves was a risk. But every single study that's looked at these when used in the real world has shown that they're associated with much, much better outcomes. Okay, so that's what we call real world evidence, right? However, the nub of all of this is the trials are very difficult to show benefit, because very reasonably people did not want to stay in a 6-year trial where 50% of people got a dummy drug, where the outcome in that trial was their death or a liver transplant. Would you stay in a trial when a therapy is available when you've got a dummy tablet and you know whether you have or not because of your blood test? I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't let a family member do it. I refuse to discuss that with patients because I think it's frankly unethical. And that's where I am with it. I know that's where the foundation are on it, and that we've got a bit of a problem. So, and remember, when they did try to do that trial, a third of the people in the dummy tablet group actually had the drug in their blood. So people were sourcing it in the black market. It's crazy. So the trial as done like that just can't answer the question. So that's what's good. Clear benefit on biochemistry, clear association to benefit using long-term follow-up. Trials can't show it, but they don't show anything. You can't interpret them. So what's the counterpoint? What is the downside of it? So there are 3 things. The first is itch. Now, we've talked about this a lot. It is an issue. It is an issue in some people. It is a manageable issue. I astonished the FDA just before Christmas because I think there's a sense that itch only occurs in PBC with people taking OCO. It's the all swans are white, but not all white birds are swans argument. So this has all got conflated over time to the extent that PBC itch is caused by OCO. And I pointed out to them that as people know, we run a dedicated symptoms clinic, and I am yet to see anybody with poorly controlled itch who's on OCO, right? They're just completely different groups of people. So PBC's always had itch. We manage it. OCO can trigger it. It can make it worse, but it responds to the same treatment. So in life, it's not a big deal, okay? But it is there, and it is an issue, and it factors into decision making. Elafibranor and seladelpar don't cause itch, and so they may be drugs that you would, or bezafibrate, you might choose one of those drugs in somebody who's got itch. So that's the one that actually is common. It occurs early. So if you're going to get it, you get it, within the first 3 months. You don't get it 2-3 years down the line, right? The second one is something that I think hepatologists have known for a long time, that people who've got advanced liver disease, cirrhosis, can end up in a state of balance. We call it compensation. So your liver's been injured, but it's still coping. So it's lost some of its reserve. So normally your liver's about 3 times the size you need it to be. You've got a load, because it's so part of the way it gets rid of all the toxins in life is it dies off and regrows. So you've got plenty of spare liver. If you've got, as I always say, if you had a cancer in your liver, you can remove a third of the liver without any problem at all, and the rest will regrow. So you've got all the spare liver. So when you're cirrhotic, you eat into that spare, but your liver is still working normally. But you can reach a point where it's kind of on a bit of a knife edge, and sometimes you can fall out to the liver not working normally. That's called decompensation, and there are lots of things that can do it. And it is very clear now that O can do that in people who've got PBC and cirrhosis, okay? And there is no doubt that can do it. There was some gung-ho use of it in America, and that caused people to die or need transplants. No doubt about that. However, it's a really important however. It is not the drug, it is how the drug was used. The single commonest cause of decompensation is a drug, in general in liver disease, and it is frusemide, a water tablet, a diuretic, okay? because dehydration can trigger this. Anything can knock people over the edge. Now, that isn't an argument to ban frusemide. It's an argument to be careful giving frusemide to people with cirrhosis. So I think this is why we moved away from treating people with cirrhosis with any of these second-line drugs. But I cannot repeat often enough, and Mo and the foundation will repeat and repeat and repeat. This fits with entirely what we should be doing with PBC. We shouldn't be waiting for people to get cirrhosis to treat them. We should treat them on day one so they never come within a country mile of developing cirrhosis. And that's what we all now do. Certainly the UK model is this: early treatment, effective treatment. People never become cirrhotic. They might present late. So this doesn't get in the way of treating 95% of PBC patients, because they've not got cirrhosis. And the whole point of treating them is to stop them getting cirrhosis. So that is the one that caused the original concern about it. Okay. And then we come to the thing which is mentioned in the chat, which is the potential for PBC, patients who are not cirrhotic taking OCA to see their liver function tests got worse. Okay. And I'm going to break the habit of a lifetime and be quite controversial here. Okay. This is nonsense, right? This is nonsense. How many people here have ever gone to the clinic and found that their liver blood tests have got a bit worse? Okay. And a lot of people will say, oh, that happens to me. Do you know why? Because that's the disease, right? So the FDA and the regulators are used to assessing liver injury in people taking tablets who don't have liver disease. But people who have liver disease, the tests fluctuate, right? Mm-hmm. The tests fluctuate. And also, I'll give away a state secret, people die of things. So occasionally people with PBC die of cancer or heart disease or infections or things like that, right? And their liver blood tests will often get worse with that. And sometimes that happens taking OCA. It's not a magic tablet that wishes away the risks of the world, okay? So coincidence happens. And there are people taking OCA whose liver blood tests get worse and who even die of other things whilst that's all happening. That's very sad. It's, I'm afraid, something that we're all familiar with. It happened before the advent of OCA. It will happen with elafibranor and seladelpar. I can guarantee it. But that does not mean the drug is unsafe. It means you've got to take a very careful look. Now, if I was to tell you that one of the cases that the FDA is concerned about was a patient with definitely cirrhotic, and you're going to think I'm making this up, and I'm not. There was a patient who went into an OCA trial, okay, who was definitely non-cirrhotic, and within 6 weeks of taking the OCA had a liver transplant, okay? That is appalling, isn't it? I mean, absolutely appalling. This is clearly an unsafe drug. However, that patient actually was on the list for a transplant for intractable itch. Why in God's name somebody thought that somebody with intractable itch should go into an OCA trial, I do not know, but welcome to America. So somebody was put in the trial whilst on the active transplant list, and 6 weeks after starting OCA, they got their liver for their intractable itch, okay? But that is still recorded as somebody without cirrhosis taking OCA who needed a liver transplant, okay? So can we just all please come back to planet Earth and look at all of this in a sane fashion, because it's all got a little silly. So what am I doing with my patients, okay? Let's be, because we think about this all the time. I would never, ever knowingly put any of my patients at risk, okay? Ever. Obviously, in a trial, in clinical practice, or in anything. However, if you've got somebody who has been on OCA for 8 years, is absolutely fine with it, and his liver blood tests are normal, actually, the riskiest thing I can do is to put them on an untried drug, when in fact, for them, the drug is clearly safe and has clearly been effective. So it's not as simple as, put them on a different drug, which hasn't got any of these concerns. But these drugs haven't got these concerns because they've only been used for the maximum of 1 year. So if you look at elafibranor and seladelpar, the trials are really for 1 or 2 years. That's it, versus 10 years of OCA in practice. So they are untried. If you look at the Scottish legal system, you have guilty, not guilty. I think you've changed this, haven't you? But you used to have guilty, not guilty, and not proven. Okay. And ochre, we know a lot about. These other drugs, there's an element of not proven there. I will know after 10 years of use. I will tell you after 10 years of use what's likely to happen with these drugs. So we need to take a common sense thing. We mention all this to people. I give everybody on ochre the option of swapping if they want to. Many of them have gone on to ochre because bezafibrate has not been effective for them or not had any problems. And, let's be honest, you can get side effects of bezafibrate. We see some kidney problems with it. We see muscle problems with elafibranor. So these things are going to all crop up. But as I said, not a single person has wanted to swap. Where people have had itch or things like that, we've actually swapped them anyway or said that's the right thing to do. So I think we all need to take a step back, look at what's actually happening in people in sensible clinics, sensible people supported by a sensible patient group, managed by sensible doctors. Let's make a sensible decision. And we have a saying that we always use, which is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay. We are used to drugs that cause us problems in liver disease, right? We're all used to it. In autoimmune hepatitis, not what we're talking about today, we use azathioprine, that can cause liver failure, bone marrow suppression. We use MMF, which can cause those things, and actually was a horrible cofactor for COVID, okay? Something we almost never saw with PBC. We use tacrolimus, which is a transplant drug, which causes brain injury and causes renal failure, right? These are drugs that are really powerful at treating autoimmune hepatitis, okay? They are really powerful. We are aware of those things, and it is getting it right. We spend a lot of time finding the right treatment for the right person, but those are well-known things. Those are all far bigger risks in our experience than ochre is in PBC. And yet nobody is arguing that you shouldn't use those treatments. Steroids, right? We use steroids in autoimmune hepatitis. Steroids have no side effects, do they? Yes, they do. So it's bizarre to us because of all the drugs we use in an autoimmune liver disease clinic, ochre is with urso the least worrying one, and yet we've got this. So I'm not a passionate advocate for ochre. I'm not a passionate advocate for elafibranor or seladelpar. I'm a passionate advocate for having lots of treatment options that we can use to give the maximum chance that we'll find the right treatment for people. I'm an absolutely passionate thing of this. And I think if there is any concern about a drug, we all need to be really sensible about it and take. But if we withdraw this drug without a good reason, the same issues that aren't a good reason to withdraw the drug, I can guarantee will crop up with elafibranor and seladelpar. And this is what I said to the FDA, is that the danger here is that drugs go on the market for 4 or 5 years, and then because you can't prove a negative, you withdraw them. So we end up with urso and bezafibrate because that's all that's left. And that is not in the interests of patients. And I think there's just is, this idea that the black box, the safety concern was because, hey, do you know what? Some people with PBC liver blood tests get worse. Welcome to PBC. And basically somebody who had a liver transplant for itch whilst on ochre had a liver transplant whilst on ochre. And we can laugh about it, but if this leads to drugs being withdrawn, it's gone mad. And I absolutely resolutely do not do politics at all. But I have to say, some of what's coming out of the Trump administration about sense coming into the FDA may actually be quite a good thing, and that actually take the patient view of this rather than the process view. And that's my one and only political comment. But I think a big step back and a bit of common sense will be a good thing. And we are working with the FDA to try and argue that FibroScan of 10, go back to our 200 equals 20 times 10, FibroScan of 10 and a bilirubin of 20, this argument that those are really meaningful factors. They are what we do in practice. So why don't we use those in trials? That's what the discussion is at the moment. And I think around the world, medical advisors to the foundation and everybody are all actively engaged in this is what we used to do without phosphotrials. That's what the regulators want. Neither of those is acceptable. Let's find the bit in the middle, and that's where we are at the moment. I'm an eternal optimist. We'll find a way through.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, we are in an amazing time where we are getting these new treatments coming along. What's happened with OCA does concern us, because we are worried that further down the line the same thing will happen. But I was just going to mention as well that you and our medical board and us at the foundation and our industry partners as well are all working together to look at alternatives for that.
And there is a big, Robert's done sterling work pulling together the industry community, because this really matters to them. And the last thing we absolutely don't want industry to think that PBC is too difficult and move away from it. So we're going to, I think we're going to need to do, this is a plea for down the line, and I don't think there'll be anybody who doesn't want to do that. We, I think, are going to want to start to collect internationally FibroScan data to prove the value of this, okay? And we kind of know enough to use it clinically. The regulators want to see a bit more about it. I don't think there's anybody on this call who would willingly, anonymously give up their FibroScan number and then what's happened to them to help the field move forward. So that's what we're saying to them is, we get the concerns about, we get it, right? But you need to get it as well in terms of, so let's all agree, let's rather than just going like that about different ways of doing it, let's find a compromise in the middle and address it. And I think that's where the foundation's been very powerful, because we're all acting as honest brokers. I think we will find our way through it. For the record, I've talked about drugs in other diseases. I think the drugs we have available in PBC actually are astonishingly effective and actually very well tolerated. And any liver doctor will tell you drugs are a cause of liver injury, full stop. Not in PBC, just in general. We see problems with drug toxicity. They're horrible sometimes, but not these drugs. Not these drugs. They are remarkably effective and remarkably safe. So I think we just have to work our way through it, but I think we will find our way through. I don't have any doubt about it. And I think one of the other things is just to get the companies to work together and, and I do think the companies realize that, maybe they think they're not having these questions asked now, but they will do, because, hey, do you know what? People with liver disease, their liver blood tests fluctuate. It happens, right? So they just need to deal with it. I think there's a little bit of lack of understanding of liver disease with the regulators, if I'm strictly honest.
And we're hosting our third International PBC Summit this year, where we bring together all our industry partners that are working in PBC. We bring together all our clinicians, and we bring together all the patient support organisations from across the world. And I think we're up to about 18 to 20 patient organisations from around the world joining us again this year. And that's where we can really make change, bring the community together.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if I was, again, as an observer of all of this, is that what is very characteristic is where there has been a negative view of it, the community, and I mean all of us, have said, actually, no, we don't accept that. Okay, we don't accept that for the following reasons. Mm-hmm. And it was very conspicuous, it's been very conspicuous to me. So I think they're quite used to people saying, oh, right, you are, Gov, we'll not do that. And actually, we've said, actually, no. Okay, actually, no, and have persevered with it. And I think that is very powerful. And actually, I think that sends a message, doesn't it? Is that if people all of a sudden wholesale were not wanting these drugs, that's kind of asked and answered, but that has absolutely not happened. I mean, people will be surprised, in the UK, the number of people starting OCA has actually gone up since all of this happened, right? So there's no voting with people voting with their feet about it. Our trial, the opera trial that people are familiar with, which does giving these drugs earlier on, cure the disease or change its trajectory, our recruitment's gone up. after all of this. So I think people kind of get it. Why, given the itch thing, do we still really want to have ochre as well as the other drugs? Is a good question. And the answer is twofold. One is it works in a different way to the other drugs. These are not interchangeable. Okay, my analogy about blood pressure tablets. One of the ways in which using several tablets is good because they complement each other. And so ochre works in a different way to the others, and it probably has some specific advantages. Okay. And the second is absolutely everybody in the field absolutely knows that the future is the combination of an ochre-like drug with one of the PPAR drugs. At the moment, it's ochre and bezafibrate, but it could be another ochre-like drug and another bezafibrate-like drug. I don't think the drugs particularly matter, but they work in different ways and they add together. And so the best rate for normalizing blood tests, the best drug for making your blood test totally normal is probably at the moment seladelpar, and it goes normal in about 20% of people. Okay, improves in the majority, is normal in about 20% of people, and increasingly for younger people in particular, we want normal. The combination of ochre and bezafibrate, normal in 60 to 70%, right? So you don't need any statistics to show that difference. And if we lose the class of drugs that ochre is, we lose the potential to do that. And if you really want to control PBC completely, and we do this routinely, it is the combination of ochre and bezafibrate. That, I think, is why ochre use is going up, not down, because we all get that. And actually, that's what we're routinely doing. So clinical practice is actually way ahead of what the regulators think we're doing. Why? Because it works. There, I'll get off my soapbox now.
I did say at the start we have quite a lot of questions today, so I do have a feel but I do feel that it is really important to cover the new medications and the concerns about ochre.
Partly it's because probably I'm the clinician who's closest to all of this, and also I've not done one of these for a while, so I think it's just a very good forum to update.
It is important, yeah. I'd actually like to move to a newly diagnosed question that we have in the chat here as well. I'm just doing a wee reply to that just now, but I think it would be a good one to go to as well. I've just replied to say that we'll do this question next, but also just to give us a call on the helpline for a chat as well. And I would say that to anyone who's watching that's newly diagnosed, please reach out to us for a chat on the helpline. We would love to talk to you. So,
sorry, Mo, can I do a shameless plug at that point for the OPERA trial? Okay,
you can.
So the OPERA trial is a government-funded trial, national trial, about if you give ochre right at the beginning of PBC, does it change the whole trajectory of the disease? Okay, so if you knock it into shape early, does it change what happens after that? And the reason for that is to do with these mechanisms of action. Because actually, we wonder if the waiting itself allows the whole thing to become embedded, right? If you're going to put a forest fire out, best do it early. It's far easier to do that, yeah? So this is a trial that's ongoing across the UK. I think there are 11 centres across the UK, which means that there are centres, reasonably convenient for everybody. There are certain criteria, but largely it's people diagnosed within the first 6 months of PBC, okay? And it's the usual thing with criteria and non-criteria and things like that. But anybody within the first 6 months who's interested, we're giving ochre or a placebo. I mean, I think for this, that's fine because you need to answer this. And basically, does it change the whole trajectory of the disease? And so the foundation know all about it. Anyone's welcome to contact us. OPERA centres. I could reel off the centres. It'd be like a party game, but there's basically one close to everybody. And I'll give a plug, an absolute call out for Glasgow. Glasgow are the biggest recruiting centre, and they are so enthusiastic about they've changed their whole way of approaching PBC on the back of all of this. And it just shows how this, this trial, this drug may have that specific benefit. I suspect it probably has, But this has done two things. It's made Glasgow think about how they can get all their patients into the system quicker, which is actually good for people. So it's actually had that effect of getting people to think about, why do we introduce delays and all this? So please do think about it. It may be the answer to, it may be the thing with ochre is, and of course, by definition, it's right at the beginning of the disease. So it's right the way away from these people with later disease where the problems arose. So it is a new way of thinking. And of course, it's a UK study because we like to think in different ways. And this is funded by the Department of Health to better manage PBC. So it's going to be open for about another 9 months or so. So anybody interested, let us know. But Mo knows all about it.
Yeah, I can help with that.
There you go, shameless plug.
So the question we've got in the chat here is from a patient who was diagnosed last week after abnormal liver tests. 2 years ago, they had a kidney transplant due to a lifetime of lupus. Liver tests went up after their transplant. They've been getting back to normal, but the doctor did an AMA test, which was 30. Can they live a normal life on Urzo? I don't have any liver damage or symptoms, just shocked at the diagnosis. And there may be other people watching in a similar position, Professor Jones. And I certainly know when I was a week diagnosed, if I could have heard advice from you, that would have been amazing. So can we just share some advice?
So what was that? How diagnosed? How long ago?
Last week.
So my first thing to say is absolute congratulations for engaging with the foundation and finding this in a week. I think that's really impressive. And actually, I'd be interested to know how you found. Actually, be interested to know how you found about the foundation. Was it your clinician that told you, or was it the internet, or whatever? So, first thing to say is that is absolutely brilliant, and it's exactly as it should be. And I send all of my patients straight over to the foundation, the first time we see them. And I think that's what all clinicians should do, because it's the other half of management. Okay. So just the specifics about the question. So the art with PBC is to diagnose it early and treat it effectively, and then to follow it up and treat it differently as you need to. And the absolute heart of that is early diagnosis and early recognition. Okay. Now, there are a couple of things that it's difficult for me to know, but here are some guesses for me. So the first is that obviously, if you've had a kidney transplant, they will have investigated your liver at that time. So it suggests that's probably not been. It won't have been there as a significant issue at the time, because it would have flagged at your anaesthetic assessment as part of all of that, because they know, as we know, that lupus is associated with liver injury in some people. So this has probably not been an issue at the time you had the transplant. So it's probably come on, a little bit before that, but it wasn't an issue, right? So the reason why you've got PBC as well as having had lupus is the two go together, because they're both diseases of the immune system. So this is likely to be an early diagnosis, and it is therefore likely to respond to treatment. And the other good bit of news is that the sorts of treatments people use for kidney rejection prevention, so immunosuppression, actually benefit PBC. So there were trials done for these years ago, actually, and these do benefit, but they don't benefit enough for you to use them just for PBC. But if you are having those sorts of treatments for another reason, then they will also have a beneficial effect. I always say this we have a lot of people going to the rheumatologist as well, like with lupus or psoriatic arthritis or something like that. And they often end up on biological drugs. And I always tell people, buy one, get one free. So you get your arthritis treated with these sorts of drugs, but they all benefit PBC to some degree. Not a reason to use the drugs for PBC, but you might as well get the benefit. Actually, we work with the rheumatologist to make sure that we kind of maximize that effect. So if somebody's brand new diagnosis, you probably didn't have a really significant problem when the kidney transplant happened, you're on Urso, then all you do is simply watch how that unfolds. But being on immunosuppression means, I suspect it isn't. So, and the message is absolutely, can you live a normal life? Absolutely, that should be the goal, and go away and forget about it. I did get asked once by a patient who actually at the time of a liver transplant said, will I be able to play golf after a liver transplant? And I said, yes, absolutely, no problem at all. Fantastic. And the guy says, oh, that's great. I can't play golf, but it would be nice to be able to do that. And I just said, I walked into that, didn't I?
Yep.
Normal life, please do. And I just think it's brilliant that you're engaged in all of this. And I hope you find these sessions I hope you find these sessions useful. I spoke to a patient this week who was new to us and who'd felt at sea when they'd got their diagnosis and had joined the foundation, and said the place that she felt that she got most was these Q&A sessions, because it demythologized it and made it accessible. And there were lots of people like her asking questions, and it just, so I can't emphasize the value of that enough. And I think one of the things, again, this is a plug to the foundation, is that so many times, particularly around symptoms, people come along and say, I thought I was the only one, and you're not. Okay, and I think that is inherently useful to people. Just shared experience.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to our next question. So it's a general question around, can PBC weaken the immune system so much that it's not able to fight off common colds quickly? Patient who's having one cold after another, could they take a multivitamin, or at least vitamin C and zinc? It's really affecting their life, and it's taking them longer to recover. They also go on to ask about vitamin B12 injections. They're not qualifying for it at NHS, but they're considering it privately. And we had another question around low folate and B12 as well, so looking at that type of thing.
It's funny you were going to ask me about that. So what was the first bit of the question? Oh, resistance to colds.
Yeah, weaken the immune system.
So in fact, if anything, PBC patients are better at fighting infection. So it will be just what's going around or something else. But I think our general advice is, a good multivitamin. But we do not see particular problems with infection. So the immune system is kind of the other way around. It's a bit snappy rather than a bit, laissez-faire. So that tends to not be the issue. A thought. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things to think about, if you do get a lot of colds, if you walk into a room and pick up a cold, or if you're next to somebody or somebody comes into the house with it, there are nowadays nasal protection sprays. Okay, so these actually predated COVID, but they came into a lot of use in COVID. So what they do is they actually just coat you can get them just over the counter in pharmacies, and they just coat the nasal cavity, and they're said to be very effective at, don't go to town over it, but if you are going to be, in a car with somebody with a the streaming cold type of thing, then they may be worth trying. So there's no evidence about them in PBC, but I've used them, and I've not got colds. I mean, who knows if you don't get a cold whether you would have got it. So just have a little think about that. Good multivitamin, and just have a think about those. They're obviously topical. You don't absorb them, so there's no toxicity risk, and it's a kind of common sense, simple thing. Okay, they always say vitamin C. My mother used to, but then my mother used to say if you bang your leg on the end of the bed, you'll get TB, and I'm not sure there's any evidence for that. So she did actually say that. So I think that's common sense. Now, B12 and folate. So B12. So just wind back. They're both vitamins. You need them principally for making red blood cells, but you also need them for a healthy nervous system. Okay, and they're actually we always talk about B12 and folate because they go together in terms of making blood cells, but they're actually very different in terms of how you absorb them. So B12 is very specifically absorbed. You take it in your diet. It's in all the things that your mum used to make you eat at Christmas that you don't like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and things. So you get a lot of B12, and it has to bind to a protein called intrinsic factor. It's produced by cells from the stomach, and the two bind together, and then it gets absorbed without intrinsic factor from the stomach. You can't absorb it. And there is an autoimmune condition called pernicious anemia, which I always think is a condition that needs better marketing. Horrible term, but you don't produce the intrinsic factor. So if you've got B12 deficiency, there's no point in eating more B12, because the problem is not the B12, it's the fact you haven't got the other factor, and you can't take that. So that's why you have injections, right? So B12 principally comes out as anemia, but severe B12 deficiency can cause neurological problems, even dementia in some people. So it's something that people watch out for. Now, folic acid, you tend to see fewer problems because you don't have this specific issue about absorbing things, but it is very important if you have B12 to take folate as well, because otherwise an imbalance can mean it can get out of kilter. Now, folate is in a sense absorbed from the diet like any other vitamin. So you take it in your diet, it crosses the gut and is taken up. And we do know that there can be some oddities about absorbing food from people's diet. Okay. Now, we don't routinely measure B12 and folate unless we've got a reason, and the reason would normally be anemia. Okay. So we don't normally measure folate, right? And it's in vitamin preparations, and obviously pregnant ladies will take folate, so you can buy it easily in various different places. It's kind of, again, it's a sort of broccoli and Brussels sprouts sort of thing. So the reason why I said funny you should mention this, so Mo doesn't know this actually. So there's a trial we're doing with Umacrine, which is about cognitive brain fog. So a drug around brain fog, which is a really potentially very important trial. So we were catching up with the people who are running it. We're running it with them, and we were talking about why people aren't eligible for the trial. And what they have found is time and time and time again, people are folate deficient. Okay, not anemic, but folate deficient, and a normal folate level is one of the requirements. Okay, now we don't routinely measure folate. Why would people be folate deficient? Okay, and there is a literature, if you go into the computer databases, around brain fog and folate deficiency, right? So we're suddenly quite interested in this, and I think we do recommend to people about a good multivitamin, making sure it's got plenty of things. But I'm just starting to wonder, we do think vitamin D is important for fatigue, but I'm just beginning to wonder about folate. So I think here's a thing for a bit of crowdsourced research. So I think, Mo, we would be really interested is if people have got experience. Do people with PBC take folate? Have they got any experience of the effects around it? Have they been told they're deficient? And so if you want to really think about everything we know that might be low in PBC that might be linked into this, I'm going to add folate to that. Listen, you cannot take too much folate, okay? It's physically, humanly impossible to do that. I'll tell you something else. There is an oddity that if you go to continental, and I know we were doing quick questions, but you do keep asking me interesting questions. And I don't know if you somebody's here the mind reader, because I was talking about folate, and isn't that interesting yesterday, right? Here's something interesting. So when you do symptom severity studies across Europe, okay, you find different rates of particularly brain fog, okay, around different countries. And it's a source of, it's a sort of some, ooh, just hang on 2 seconds, will you? I will come back with a punchline.
I should get danger money for this, guys. I should. I'm a bit worried about what's coming back.
I'm back. Honestly, so I'm working at home today, and it's just marvelous because I can open the door for all my son's Amazon parcels bought on my credit card. Right. So if you do these studies right across, I'm sure this doesn't happen with all the other people. I'm sure they're more serious than me. I am actually very serious, but I think this is fascinating. So folate, right. So if you do a study across Europe, you'll find that there's a different degree of brain fog. Okay. And some of that seems to be Southern Europe versus Northern Europe, which things like multiple sclerosis, there's a sort of geographical gradation anyway. And people think about things, is it sunlight and vitamin D and all of those things, people think about that. But if you look at Germany versus here, sort of similar latitude, we see a lot more fatigue. And I always used to think it's because, German patients daren't discuss it with their doctors. And I used to tease them about it. However, isn't this interesting? What are some of the other differences between, say, the UK and other European countries? Well, we don't fortify flour with folic acid, okay? It's been a sort of political debate for a while, but other countries do. And that means that rather like you have iodine in salt, okay? So public health interventions sometimes include food having additives to them. And I'm just starting to wonder do we see more of these things because we don't put folate in? I'm not arguing we put folate in food, but you can get folate for about £2 a pot in Tesco's. And actually, I do wonder if that's something people shouldn't think of. So I think nutritional, it's a huge area of interest of ours, is nutritional optimization. I do wonder if we shouldn't perhaps start to get a dietitian involved in thinking about optimal supplements and things for this. So folate, I'm fascinated by. Why were all those people who had brain, and of course all the people who had a low folate had come into this because they had brain fog. And isn't it interesting?
It is very, and we do get a lot of questions around supplements and what things to eat and that type of thing. So any additional information we can provide.
Yeah, I do so. I wonder if we should. We've got some really good dietitians interested in all of this, and I do. Many people will know about the physios in Birmingham and their exercise intervention thing, which is great. And I do wonder if actually a diet version of that, which is, look at me, what can I tell you about healthy eating, right? So I do think something to pull all the information together would be interesting.
I would also love to do one of these with a dietitian. So if you've got someone in mind, I would love to do that.
Ooh, that is a really good idea. Leave that with me. Maybe do a double act, okay?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, definitely.
I'll get one of my dietitians to come along and do that. We've got a couple that are doing PhDs with me who are whip smart, really nice people. What a great idea. Will you email me about that, Mo?
I will do, and I'll be sending out the information about the next set of dates for the next quarter anyway, so we could hopefully fit it into that. That'd be great.
I think they'd be a bit scared doing it on their own, but I think if we did it as a double act, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
Have you done it with a physio? Have you had any of the physios do it as well?
Not on the Q&A, but the physios who were at the patient conference, those videos are all up on YouTube for patients to look at, and we are looking at doing a potential session.
We've got a senior physio who's heavily involved in the Birmingham exercise study, who's really keen to get more involved in PBC. So if you're interested, I'm sure she would be really interested in answer. And I think if we gave people notice, then we could collect questions about those areas. I think that might be a really good idea.
Yeah, it's always something that's been on our radar actually, is to try and include other multidisciplines. That would be fab. Now I'm going to, because you went to get a parcel, I'm going to squeeze one more question in before you go. Can an imbalance in the gut link to PBC, and are there any gut tests available via clinician to test for imbalances?
So I suspect this is about the microbiome, which is something that there's a high degree of awareness about. Okay. So our guts have bacteria in them. It's part of it's what's called a symbiotic relationship. So we provide a safe environment for the bacteria, and the bacteria help us absorb our food. So actually, if you are unhealthier if you have no bacteria in your gut than if you have them. So people think bacteria are bad for you, but these are good bacteria. So all of that, Yakult and all of, it is actually true. So so there's a healthy distribution. Now, where do the bacteria come from? Well, you're colonized from very, very early in life, and you normally share a microbiome with your mother. Okay, so from close contact with the mother, that's what the thing looks like. But then if you have a lot of antibiotics, then that will often reset. You go and live in a different part of the world, it will reset over time. And it's very interesting because you look at there was some work done years ago about people who left from the UK and went to Australia. So obviously Australia has, amongst its population groups, a sort of UK derived genetic population. But 2 generations in Australia, the risk of PBC is the same as for other Australians. It is not the same as for people in the UK. Okay. So that's part of the argument for an environmental factor in these diseases. So you clearly don't lose the genetics don't change, but you change. The risk goes with where you live, not where your family came from. And one of the theories is that you are changing the microbiome. Okay. Now, we did a study as part of UK PBC, and there might be people on the call who took part in it. And what that showed actually is that there are some characteristic microbiome changes in PBC. And interestingly, there is a difference between people who are URSO responders and URSO non-responders. So we did that study because obviously URSO goes through your gut. So if your gut is different in different people, and we know the bacteria affect how your gut absorbs food, is that why some people don't respond to URSO? And the answer is possibly a little bit. And in a sense, there's something in it. So it's an obvious question. So where does that take us? So there are people who do fecal transplant. Okay, let's not dwell. And to reset the microbiome, there are obviously, goes back to the nutritional thing, Yakult and other supplements are available. And the question at the moment is we don't know. Okay, we don't know. Now, the person who knows a lot about this is Palak Trivedi. Does Palak do the Q&As?
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
So can I strongly recommend, he knows far more about this than me and has done trials in this area. So I would strongly recommend you raise this with Palak about, and here you can ask him, I'll have the first question. It will be from D. Jones in Newcastle. Okay. And D. Jones in Newcastle says, do you think fecal transplant to modify the microbiome would work in PBC? Okay. I don't know the answer. Okay. I think, my personal view, best guess, is that these things are important in the balance as to what's going on and why it happened to you today rather than next week. And I'm less convinced that it will give us something that we can treat. It maybe explains why it is as it is, but that's not the same as changing it will change as it is. Okay. I mean, a little while ago, we were very interested, and we never really followed it up, is why do some people get AMA and never develop PBC, and other people get AMA and go on to develop PBC? So it's clearly not the AMA that on its own, because they're the same. And we did wonder if that was a microbiome difference, but I'm not aware of anybody following it up. The difficulty with these studies is that if you go to a town 5 miles away from where you live, the typical microbiome will be different. It's really, really dictated by the local environment, the water, what's there. So it's a really difficult to do the study. So if you're going to look at, is there a different microbiome between PBC and people without PBC, you need somebody living next door. Okay. And whereas you might be prepared to collect a stool sample because you want to improve our understanding of PBC, that's a tougher sell for somebody who doesn't have PBC, okay, who has less vested in it. So they're just very difficult. But Palak does know a lot about this. He'd be a really good person to talk about it.
Yep, I'll keep that on the back burner for the next time we have Palak join us as well. Thank you.
And I do, just to add to that, I do wonder if, I mean, so I'm a big fan of thinking through. We talk about in the fatigue world about the snake. Think of a snake, right? And actually, if completely normal function is a straight, it's better visually this, but I'm going to impersonate it. So you've got a straight line, which is everything's working normal. A snake is a sort of deviations. That's gone up, that's gone down, that's gone up. And these are things that aren't working normally. The whole principle of what we're trying to do with treatment is to straighten the line, is to bring that down, that up, that down. And this will be, we just talked about folate, we talked about vitamin D. They're all part of these things that are not normal in PBC. Does making them normal change anything? Well, it's not going to harm, is it? That returning everything to normal is going to be closer to normal, right? So that's the philosophy behind it. I can't tell you whether vitamin D being in the normal range is going to specifically help X, Y, or Z, but I can tell you it's more normal to be normal than not normal, if you know what I mean. And the microbiome might be part of that, okay? And I do wonder if, for example, the GI disturbance some people get with urso might be a microbiome thing, okay? So the one situation they do use fecal transplant is in antibiotic-associated diarrhea, so C. diff infections. It's a really effective treatment to reset. And anybody who's got GI disturbance, it's always very possible with that. So on a serious note, and I don't have shares in it, think about Yakult and those things. They are very physiological. You can get a lot of the same effect actually just by natural yogurt. So, just look for, natural live yogurt is a quite good way of doing it. Sourdough bread actually, does a lot of those things as well. So I do think it's part of that normalization thing. So if you aren't getting a lot of GI disturbance with urso, it might be worth trying that, because that will do a bit of a reset of your microbiome.
Great, thank you. And thank you again for giving your time to us this week. That's been a brilliant session.
Sorry for going a little bit.
That's okay. That's okay. And I'd just
I'm
like to say
you haven't had this for a while, so you had to go.
I know. Just to say as well, if you have submitted a question and we didn't get to it, we always hold over the questions that have been sent in to us. We always hold over for the next session. And all of our old sessions where there's lots of other input. You mentioned anemia, Ella. We've got a little mini that I did from one of your longer videos on anemia on PBC TV on YouTube. So there's lots more, either small bite size or the full videos there to view as well. So please do that.
And just last thing. Do you remember the Sherlock Holmes thing? Once you've excluded all the other alternatives, whatever is left is the answer, however implausible. And I think that's that concept, that normalize everything that you possibly can. And I have a feeling that if you do that, eventually normality will return. I think the earlier you do that in the disease course, and sometimes that's what you just need to do, is basically make everything normal that you can find, and does make everything else normal. That's my philosophy.
Thank you. And just to say as well, if you need urgent support before the next session, you can always give us a call on the helpline. We're here if you need us. Just give us a call. Thank you very much, Professor Jones, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Pleasure as always. Have a good day, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us online and on Facebook as well. Thank you.